Thank you. Yes, guys, welcome back to another video here on the Andy #1 channel. Today, it's a new video. It's the second video in a new series called Goalkeeper Weekly Review, where we take goalkeeping performance within the last 7 days. We talk about it, we break it down, we analyse it, we go through the positives and the negatives of a particular, get my P's right, particular performance. I'm joined, as last week, with football statistician, data scientist, Astro Physicist, Twitter extraordinaire, John Harrison. John, how are you doing today?
Yeah, great. Really glad to be back on.
Fantastic. If you are not following John already on Twitter, make sure that you do. Some phenomenal insight into the world of goalkeeping. And of course, if you do like this video, make sure you smash that like button. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do for more content coming soon. And if you have liked this series so far in the last 2 videos, comment below what you like about it, what you think we should improve on, or if there are any topics that you'd like to see us discuss in the future, let us know and comment below. So, John, in terms of today and today's video, we're going to be talking about Aaron Ramsdale. It's another performance versus Liverpool. Last week was Jordan Pickford and Everton versus Liverpool, and now we seem to be following the opposition Liverpool goalkeepers. He hasn't had a great season so far into Sheffield United, I'll say. Haven't had a great season so far. They're rooted to the bottom of the table. Looks like they're going to get relegated. Aaron Ramsdale might get relegated for the 2nd year in a row. But how overall has Aaron Ramsdale been playing?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting one because Ramsdale, like you were hinting at there, has had a lot of criticism this season. But actually, if we look at his statistics and how he's performed versus his expected saves, he actually had quite a decent start to the year. He was saving Sheffield United a few goals above average. But then around match day 10 sort of mark, this seems to drop off really quickly. And that is actually when in the media he was getting the biggest amount of criticism and scrutiny over his performance, and a lot of comparisons to Dean Henderson were made, which personally I don't think are fair because they're completely different keepers and they're at different stages of their career. But yeah, he did seem to drop off, and it really seemed to affect his performances. But actually in the last 5 game weeks, we can see that he's pushed on and he's back now saving shots above his expected saves metric. And this Liverpool performance just sort of exemplified that perfectly, where he saved about 1.5 goals above what you'd expect an average Premier League keeper to save.
Yeah, I mean, that graphic's really interesting. I really like that graphic. You've got the peak of the first part of the season, then the trough, and now it seems to be averaging itself out again. How did that correlate to Sheffield United's performances overall?
Yeah, so it's quite a weird one. Ramsdale seems to have been really unlucky, and this is probably why he got a lot of scrutiny, in that his best performances just don't correlate with Sheffield United winning. And games where he has to do basically nothing, Sheffield United seem to nick or win, and then he doesn't then get the praise. So, for example, that 1-0 win over Newcastle, he barely had anything to do. He just had to collect a few crosses, and there was a few shots from range. So then the sort of the praise isn't heaped on him. Whereas his best games were this game against Liverpool, which they lost 2-0, the game against Man City where they lost 1-0, and the game against Leeds where they lost 1-0. So I think it's one of those unfortunate things that we all know as being a goalkeeper. If your best games are in matches where your team lose, you can often sort of avoid the praise, and it's just a harsh nature of the position.
It's such a shame, isn't it, when you play well and lose as a goalkeeper? I mean, just talking personally, you play in goal, I play in goal. How do you take that? Do you take it as in, I'm quite happy I've played well, but we've lost? Or do you take it as a team game, we've lost, therefore I'm not happy?
I think it definitely depends on the sort of the way the season's going. So if we were challenging for a title or something, I would still be gutted that we'd lost the game, and that might potentially affect, or similarly, if we were in a relegation battle, and that might send us down. But if we were sort of mid-table scrapping around, I think I could normally take the positives out of it and be quite happy with my own personal performance. Because it's one of those things. It really, just for me anyway, it depends how important that result actually is, and is it just actually playing well this week is a good stepping stone for next week where we can go for the points then.
Yeah, and I noticed that actually you're wearing your Cambridge United, sorry, not Cambridge United, your Cambridge University top. Do you want to just flash that to the camera? Just there it is.
Yeah, no, it's just a mid layer I got probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I think.
Nice. Right, so going back to Aaron Ramsdale, we're going to be talking about. I mean, he seemed to be. What did Jurgen Klopp said something in his post-match conference about how well Aaron Ramsdale played. He made numerous saves. He made a good range of saves as well. and we're going to talk through a couple of 1v1 saves that he made versus Jones and versus Firmino, and then also we're going to talk about Salah, wasn't it? Yeah, Salah. Yeah, Salah and Jones. This is 1v1s. He's made a save also against Trent Alexander-Armstrong, and also save versus Firmino as well. But we're going to start with those 1v1 saves with Salah and Jones, isn't it? I mean, the Salah 1v1 is, again, it's very similar to the 1v1 that Pickford faced last week. Salah always seems to get himself into that inside right position. He dances through a couple of defenders. Now, what I noticed between this 1v1 versus last week's 1v1 is that the defending in this 1v1 seems to be that little bit better, which forces Salah a little bit further away. Now, I'm not sure if it was a cross or a shot from Salah on his right foot. I think it was heading towards the bottom corner, but it's a big right boot from Aaron Ramsdale to keep it out. Yeah,
no, it's a perfect example of one of Ramsdale's biggest strengths, really. He's really, really quick off his line. So as soon as the ball falls to Salah and he's got that little bit of space 1v1, we see Ramsdale rushes off his line, spreads himself well, and he basically just fills the goal. Salah just ends up toe poking it at his foot, and really there's no distance for him to chip it over him. He can't round him because he's too close to goal. Basically, Ramsdale just makes it almost impossible for Salah to finish it, and that's basically the perfect thing you can do as a goalkeeper 1v1. If you make yourself so big there's nothing to hit, you're always going to make the save. And yeah, like I said, it's a real big strength of Ramsdale's. So in fact, he's faced 14 close range 1v1s this year. That just means inside about 13 yards from goal. And he's saved 10 of them, which is 71%, whereas the average Premier League keeper saves about 55%. So if you actually extrapolate this over, he's probably saved Sheffield United about 3 goals just because of how good he is at these close range 1v1s, because of his speed off the line and also his body shape. He always seems to get it right and just fill the goal.
Because from a coaching perspective here, yes, Salah's close in. I mean, he's just inside the 6-yard box, but Ramsdale gets within a couple of yards of him now, which actually brings him outside of the goal frame, doesn't it? Now, some people might in this instance be more likely to stay close and protect the goal itself rather than coming out and shooting that angle. But the model that you've got shows that actually that's the right decision in this instance, to come down and shoot that angle.
Yeah, indeed. And that's basically why I did the research, because I knew sort of from physics that there must be sort of an arc around the goal where you should stay on your line and an arc when it's outside there, and where you need to rush out because you just won't have enough reaction time when it's inside there. And yeah, from my model, I found that basically as long as it's in the 6-yard box, and then it has a little bit of a dome at the top going to around the penalty spot, then rushing out is probably the right thing to do. Because if you can get close enough to the ball, it means there's just nothing, that they will always end up hitting you. And sometimes, like you do say, that does mean leaving the goal frame on those instances where it's between the post and the 6-yard, the horizontal part of the 6-yard box.
And in this instance as well, I mean, he seems to have quite a good shape about him. He's made himself as big as possible. But is there an element, do you think, of him kind of leaning more to one side? It looks to me like he's potentially leaning more to his left-hand side, which would take him off the pitch, like covering that near post a little bit more. I mean, he's made the save. This has been ultra critical, isn't it? Really, he's made the save.
But yeah, potentially, I do agree. Potentially, his body shape could be a little bit more central. But I think it's one of those things, and like I imagine I do it when I play. Sometimes you sort of have a little bit of a guess that, oh, is he going to try and curl it near post and just slightly shift your body shape across to that side. And I think as long as you're not twisting your body, which is probably the worst thing you can do, or leaning backwards, which really shrinks the amount of goal you cover, I think a little lean to either side probably isn't the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his technique in that instance, it's a slightly different 1v1, isn't it, versus Curtis Jones, but the way that he's on top of the ball and the shape that he's making, it's very reminiscent of that big kind of Peter Schmeichel starfish type save. There's nowhere else for that ball to go but to hit Aaron Ramsdale, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's sort of this textbook perfect. If we were saying he's leaning a little bit on the other one, this one is completely textbook perfect spread. And like you say, it just has to hit him. And as I said before, this is why he's got one of the best close range 1v1 save percentages in the Premier League, because he can get out so quickly and then make a shape as beautiful basically as you can see on that image there. And yeah, just forces Jones to hit him. And it's one of those things, that you really just want to train on line speed and body shape as a goalkeeper, because Ramsdale probably found that save quite easy and it probably comes quite natural to him. But actually, it's a really hard skill and it requires a lot of hours on the training ground to be able to just do that in those big pressure moments. And Ramsdale's been doing that a lot this year.
I love it how you say it's a beautiful picture, isn't it? Like your idea of Van Gogh is Aaron Ramsdale coming up.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, the second, well, that's 2 saves that he's done very successfully. Another successful save that he made was the 1v1 versus Firmino. And this is very early on in the game, wasn't it, when the score was still 0-0. Firmino's broken through. Now, when I've seen the graphics of your models that you've used before, this one was questionable to me whether or not, I mean, again, he's made the save, but potentially it was questionable for me whether or not that was the right decision that he's made in terms of the distance that he's got from the ball. I think he's about 7 yards out. Firmino's about 17 yards out, there or thereabouts. I mean, that's just me just guessing, looking at a picture or so. So that gap is 10 yards in comparison to what is potentially a 2 or 3 yards in the other 1v1s, in the other 1v1 saves that he's made. So what are your thoughts around that? What do these stats tell us, your research?
Yeah, so I'm echoing basically what you've just said there, and that's Firmino's, a decent way out. In fact, he's, a good few yards outside the sort of nominal 13.5 yards that my research says you should engage within. And that's basically because, like you say, he just can't get close enough to the ball. If you want to save a 1v1, you want to get within 2 or 3 yards of the opponent, because that's when you fill the goal. If you're like Ramsdale is here, about 7 yards away from your opponent, the goal still looks pretty big. So indeed, my model suggests that if he'd have stayed on his line or within his 6-yard box, sort of close in around to his line, as you would basically treat it like a normal shot, he'd have a sort of 67% chance of making a save. Whereas if he does what he does, which is sort of engage and rush forwards a little bit, he would cut that to about 43%. But like you say, he did make the save, but the statistics sort of show he did make it harder for himself. And in fact, if we actually watch the Firmino finish, he hits it very centrally and down the middle, and Ramsdale manages just to flick his other hand up as he's diving one side and manages to flick it onto his leg. So he almost, in fact, dived out of the way of it. But it's still a good save. But interestingly, he did make it harder for himself. And actually, long-range 1v1s like this are something that Ramsdale's actually really struggled with this year. So in sort of stark contrast to the close-range 1v1s, he's only saved 36% of the long-range 1v1s he's faced. And an average Premier League keeper saves about 58. So if we extrapolate that again, he's actually cost Sheffield United about 3 goals versus the average keeper due to his sort of inability to deal with these situations. And I imagine that is something to do with him being so fast, because he is so fast off his line. He thinks he can always get there, and he ends up rushing out and sort of costing himself. So there's a few situations that were similar to Firmino's that actually ended up in goals, and that was a Rashford goal for Manchester United and a Timo Werner goal for Chelsea. Both similar situations where it's a 1v1, he ends up rushing forwards and diving, and then it goes past him straight down the middle, which could have happened on Firmino's. So I think it's a sort of interesting point. I think Ramsdale's definitely put in a man of the match performance, but this save, weirdly, because it's a save, actually highlights one of his biggest weaknesses, and that's that sometimes he can sort of overcommit himself a little bit too early on long-range 1v1s.
So in that instance, what should he be doing?
So the sort of the data I have and the model I've produced suggests he should sort of stay maybe 4 or 5 yards out in his 6-yard box, and then if Firmino's going to shoot now, he'll make it a pretty straightforward save from him. If you actually follow the trajectory of the ball, the shot was probably about waist height and about a yard to the off centre. So you can imagine that'd be a nice little catch in there for him if he stayed deep. But obviously, by staying deep, Firmino might now instead take a touch and bring it closer to goal. But actually, my model shows that in those cases, the keeper actually sort of counterintuitively bringing them closer to goal gives the keeper a better chance, because, as you'll know, Firmino could take a heavy touch and then you just run out and pick it up and the chance is gone. Or if Firmino does take a good touch, you can still then, and it brings him within, 10 yards of goal. If you then rush out, you can get within 2 or 3 yards of him, and then you've given yourself a much better chance of making a save than if we're trying to get within only 7 yards of him when he's at the edge of the box. So yeah, I think my model would suggest ideally stay, because then you have a better chance of saving the shot. And also, if they do take a touch, then you actually have a better chance of saving the 1v1, even though it's closer. It sounds sort of counterintuitive, but you can get closer to the ball, so you can actually increase your chance of making the save.
Yeah, that does seem counterintuitive. I mean, prefer everyone to be as far away from as possible from my goal as rather than bring them in. And I suppose as soon as that attacker then takes that additional touch, it's that quick decision making. Is it an engaging block? Is it an engaging smotherer? Is it a weight? Because there is as well, there's a little bit of defensive pressure. There's defensive cover coming from somewhere in the majority of those examples as well. So obviously you've got to take that into consideration and into account as well.
Yeah, and that's another thing about why waiting actually isn't a bad. It seems like waiting has been sort of dismissed as a strategy sometimes for these sort of 1v1s, but actually, if defensive pressure can come across, he's not like he's running into the whole half. Like, he's not got the whole half to himself. And a little bit of defensive pressure can change a lot of things. It can make him sort of screw up his touch and make it a heavy touch, or it can mean that his touch gets stuck under him and the defender actually gets across and makes the tackle, and the keeper never even has to make a save. So yeah, I think that's definitely a crucial thing to think about as well. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting you say that in long range 1v1s, he's performing 3 goals worse than the average Premier League goalkeeper, but you're saying in close range 1v1s, performing 3 goals better than the average Premier League goalkeeper. So in Aaron Ramsdale's case, what you're suggesting here is that he should actually be saying, come closer. Everyone get closer to my goal as possible. Which
exactly, because he's so quick and he gets so, when they are close, he gets so close to them that there's just no space to hit. Whereas when they're far away, he still tries to get close to them, but he just can't. It's like, it's not possible. He's not whatever Usain Bolt. He can't do that 15 yards in the split second he needs to.
Moving away slightly from 1v1s. Now, the next save that we're going to talk about here is Trent Alexander-Armstrong. Now, I've got no idea what Sheffield United were doing from a defensive perspective. I think there were 3 or 4 passes which potentially, do you know what, the Sunday morning manager might not have been very happy with the type of football that was attempted to be played in their own 18-yard box. Some others maybe. But anyway, this loose pass came across to Trent Alexander-Armstrong on that right-hand side. He's cut back inside on his left foot, and he's on the angle, isn't he, of the post and 6-yard box. And Aaron Ramsdale, he's pulled it onto his left foot. Aaron Ramsdale's pulled out a top-class save.
Yeah, no, I really love his little shuffle before the shot happens to make sure he gets himself in line with the ball. And it's one of those where I also like his slightly deeper than usual for Ramsdale position. And you can see from the still, he actually almost saves it a little bit behind him because he needed that extra split second of reaction time to get his hands up there. And yeah, no, it's a great save, and something you'd often see maybe the keeper, as it comes across to him, panics a little and shuffles a few yards forwards, ends up really close to the 6-yard line. And then you can imagine by the time that shot's got to them, it's already over them before they've got their hands up and it's in the back of the net. So yeah, I really like the sort of pre-shot routine from Ramsdale on this one. It makes the save, it makes the shot straight at him. So when a commentator, they probably even said it on the commentary, oh, nice save from Ramsdale, it was straight at him though. Well, yeah, it was straight at him because of his really good pre-shot routine that made it look easier than it actually was.
Yeah, there's 2 things that stood out for me on that save, actually. One of them you've touched on there was his positioning to get to, and it's the positioning not only that he's taking from the shot location, but it's also his defender's positioning as well, which makes his positioning that little bit easier. They seem to create this corridor of this is where the ball is going, and it's really important to be able to take those little triggers from other people in terms of those positional alignment. And the other thing that was noticeable to me is that he seemed to be taking a really wide base on his save. His initial stance before getting his hands up seemed to be a lot wider than a lot of people would coach or would have thought potentially from that distance.
Yeah, it's one of Ramsdale's sort of traits. He often jumps into this super wide stance, and it has on occasion sort of cost him. And it was one of the things people were talking about earlier in the season, that I think there was a few headers he conceded that were quite slow, but because he jumped into the wide stance, he then had to dive straight away, so he couldn't get a little step in before the dive. And I think it's one of those things. It's how Ramsdale plays, and when he times it right, he can then land, get the step in, and then dive. But like you say, sometimes it is dangerous, and that's the reason people aren't going to actively coach it. And that's because if you get the timing slightly wrong, you can end up with the ball traveling, and then suddenly you have no time to take a step, and your feet aren't in a position where a step's easy because they're so wide. You have to sort of move them back to then take the step. So yeah, it's definitely sort of a little bit of a weakness in Ramsdale's game, but he's such an athlete and he can time it, usually anyway, time it so well, it doesn't actually make a lot of detriment to his ability to save the shot. But yeah, it's one of those things. I think Ajax did a study on it and found that a lot of coaches actually get it wrong, and that shoulder width is too narrow for a base. You actually lose a bit of explosive power. But once you go to about 1.2 times, so 120% of your shoulder width, if your feet are that far apart, you lose too much power because you're too wide and you can't generate it. And they found, it was a really cool study, that about 110%. So if you get your feet 1.1 times your shoulder width when you're about to dive, that's perfect for generating power and it not being too narrow to get any sort of leverage, but also not too wide that you're sort of splayed out and can't actually generate the power. So yeah, I think Ramsdale often does go too far and gets it closer to the 120% than the 110. But it's one of those, if you can time it correctly, it doesn't end up being a huge issue.
I mean, I don't know if you listen to the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphrey. It's one of my favourites at the moment. And if you haven't listened, did I mention this last week as well? I think I've been talking to everyone and anyone about this podcast. But Kasper Schmeichel, when he was talking about working in millimetres, I mean, that study there just says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you're the same width as your shoulders, then you're too narrow. If you're 1.2, so there's a 20% margin in there, then you're too wide. So you've really got to get that quite right. And that's a lot of the technical fine details that goalkeepers are working with, and a lot of the stuff that often is either a goal or not a goal, or a save in one way. So yeah, right. John, it's always fascinating to talk to you. I love talking to you about this sort of thing. I feel like just reading through your Twitter feed as one is very insightful as well. So again, if you don't follow John already on Twitter, make sure that you do. Insightful as always. Thank you very much for that fascinating chat about Aaron Ramsdale's performance about Liverpool. Who would it be next week, do you think? Who are Liverpool playing next week? It will most probably be that goalkeeper who will pull off a worldie and have a phenomenal game for the third week in a row. Right, if you have enjoyed this video, make sure, again, like I mentioned before, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, click that notification bell so you get notifications when all these new videos are coming up, and comment down below what sort of videos you would like to see, which goalkeeper in focus you'd like to know about, or anything like that. Comment below and we'll chat back to you as soon as possible. Thanks a lot for watching. Catch you all soon.